The first thing I saw that morning was a white painted sign at the end of my own gravel drive, telling people they were welcome somewhere I had not been asked to name. The coffee was still hot in my thermos. The sun was just coming up over the east pasture, low and pale through a line of sycamores, and there it was in looping gold letters. Welcome to Parker Ridge at Hollow Brook, Claire and Brent's wedding weekend. Parker Ridge was what the real estate lady had called the place once years ago before June laughed her right back into the car and said, "It's a farm, not a golf course." I stood there beside my truck with the thermos in one hand and looked at that sign longer than I should have. By 7 o'clock, the rental men had already started dropping folding chairs in rows down by the lower barn, and somebody from the caterer was asking where they could plug in warming trays. I pointed them toward the outlet strip in the washroom and then went to open the chain on the side gate because the florist's van was nosed up crooked against the ditch. That is the sort of thing I've done all my life. Open the thing, carry the thing, fix the thing before somebody younger notices it's wrong and turns it into a discussion. My name is Walt Lawson. I'm 71 years old, and my daughter Claire was getting married on the farm my wife and I spent 42 years building into something worth bringing people to. Not a show place, not one of those barn venues where city people come out to pretend they know what hay smells like. A real place. Fence lines that needed mending in March, mud in April, dust in August, frozen hydrants if January got mean enough. I had already moved 6 coolers, checked the stock tank in the back field, and put 2 plywood sheets over the soft spot by the equipment shed so nobody in dress shoes would sink up to the ankle. By the time Claire came out of the house in a white robe with her hair pinned half up and her phone in one hand, I had sweat through the back of my work shirt. "You're still in that," she said, not cross exactly, just quick. "Dad, the photographer's getting here at 9. I looked down at myself. Brown work shirt clean enough at dawn dirt now across one sleeve where the side gate had stuck. "I'm changing." She gave me a little smile, distracted already, and touched my arm, like she was moving a shopping cart aside in a grocery aisle. "Okay. And can you make sure nobody parks near the maple? Brent wants that whole line clear in the background." The maple had been there longer than any of us. June used to say the place would look naked without it. I said, "People always park near the maple." "Not today," Claire said. "We're trying to keep it clean." She was gone before I answered. The house smelled like sausage coffee and hairspray. My sister-in-law, Elaine, was at the stove in a church apron somebody had probably had since 1988, turning patties in a cast-iron skillet while 2 girls from the salon spread makeup bags over June's old kitchen table. That hit me harder than it should have. June had sanded and sealed that table herself one winter when money was thin and we couldn't afford a new one. There were still 2 tiny burn marks by the far edge from where Claire, age 14 and full of apology, had set down a curling iron too fast. Elaine glanced up at me. "You eat yet?" "Had coffee. That's not food. It's enough till later." She studied me for a second in that way women my age do when they've known you too long to be fooled by a normal tone. Then she slid a plate toward me with 2 sausage patties and half a biscuit anyway. I stood at the counter and ate while women crossed the kitchen in robe belts and slippers, carrying flowers garment bags and coffee cups with lipstick on the rims. Somebody had moved June's crock of wooden spoons off the stove and replaced it with a tray of little bottled waters with custom labels around them. Claire and Brent. August 14th. As if hydration itself needed branding. That was the second thing that bothered me. Not enough to say anything, just enough to feel a little foreign in my own kitchen. Brent came in around 8 wearing pressed khakis and a white undershirt, talking before he was fully through the door. "We should move the bourbon barrel table another 10 feet toward the barn doors," he said to nobody in particular. "That way the welcome area reads cleaner when people come in." Then he saw me at the counter and smiled like we were both men at a hardware store considering deck stain. "Morning, Walt." "You get the back lane opened?" "I did." "Perfect. We've got the black SUV for the videographer coming in that way." Also, if anybody asks, we're keeping the tractor out of shots unless Claire wants it for one rustic setup. He said rustic like he'd invented wood. I wiped my fingers on a napkin and looked at him. That tractor still works every week. It ain't a prop. He gave a quick laugh. Right. No, of course. I just mean visually. Visually. I finished chewing and took my plate to the sink. He was still talking, already turned away now, telling one of the groomsmen where the cigar table would go after dinner. When June was alive, she had a way of standing between me and certain kinds of tone before they landed all the way. Not defending me, exactly. More like translating the world before it hardened. She'd hear something like that, and later, by the mudroom, say, "Don't let him make you feel old, just because he only knows furniture from catalogs." Then she'd kiss my cheek and ask me to carry and feed. After she died, people started speaking around me more. By 9:30, I was showered, shaved, and in the grey suit Claire had picked out for me 6 weeks earlier. It fit well enough if I kept my shoulders back. I stood in the bedroom I had shared with June and knotted my tie in the mirror she used to wipe with vinegar because she said store glass cleaner left streaks. The room was half changed now. Claire had taken the quilt off the bed and put on some pale coverlet from town because it photographed lighter. There was a basket in the corner with rolled hand towels and little lavender soaps for out-of-town guests sitting where June's sewing stand used to be. Down by the barn, the chairs were full. August heat was starting to climb off the packed dirt, and the smell was a mix of cut grass, perfume, dust, barbecue smoke from the caterer, and the sweet rot of old hay in the loft. The kind of smell that tells the truth whether people want it to or not. The ceremony itself went by in a blur of vows, tissues, and somebody's baby making one sharp, unhappy noise right at the quietest part. Claire looked beautiful. I'll say that plain. She was my daughter. I had held her on this same piece of ground when she was 6 weeks old and colicky, walking slow circles in the yard because June was too tired to stand another minute. There are kinds of love that do not get smaller just because they get hurt. After the kiss and the clapping, people drifted toward the barn's side for photographs while the band sound-checked under the tent. I stayed near the post by the side door because that was where the photographer's assistant had told me to wait after the family grouping, except there hadn't been a family grouping with me in it. First it was bridesmaids, then Claire with Elaine, then Claire with Brent's parents, then just the girls, then just the Mercers, then one with immediate family. I stepped forward on that one because whatever else was true, I knew what immediate meant. Claire saw me moving and lifted her hand fast, smiling that same calm public smile. Hang on just a second, Dad. We're doing wedding sideline first. Wedding sideline. I stopped where I was. The photographer, a young man in tan suspenders and expensive sneakers dusted white from the yard, glanced at me and then away again, lens already up. Brent put his hand at Claire's waist. Brent's mother moved in. Brent's father squared his jacket. Claire's maid of honor adjusted the train. Nobody looked mean. That's the part that can make a thing sting longer. Nobody had to. I stood there in my good suit with the barn behind them, red boards bright in the sun. June and I had painted those boards together in '97 after a bad storm peeled half the old coat off. She had gotten paint on both forearms and laughed when I told her she looked like she'd tried to wrestle the barn and lost. Dad, Claire said, eyes still toward the camera. We'll get one with you later. The shutter clicked 3 times. A woman from the planners team brushed past me carrying a crate of votives and said, "Excuse me, sir." Sir. Not even knowing who I was standing 10 feet from the barn I'd built lean-tos onto with my own hands. I went around the side of the barn, then past the stacked kegs and the coil of green hose somebody had tried to hide behind burlap. The gravel gave under my dress shoes. Out by the side yard, away from the music and the camera directions, I took my phone out of my jacket pocket because I felt it buzzing. There was a voicemail from Martin Kessler, the attorney June and I had used for years. I listened to the first line once, then again. "Walt, call me now," he said. His voice was tight in a way I had never heard before. "It's about the property filing." I called him back, standing in the strip of shade between the barn and the side yard. One dress shoe, half sunk in soft dirt where somebody had watered the hydrangeas too hard. He picked up on the first ring. "Walt, where are you?" "At the barn. Can you talk freely?" I looked around. Beyond the corner, I could still hear the photographer calling for cousins and laughter rising and falling the way it does when people are trying to seem easy for a camera, as freely as a man can at his own daughter's wedding. There was a pause. Then Martin said, "Did you sign anything in the last 2 months authorizing Claire Mercer or Brent Mercer to represent ownership of the farm for commercial event use?" The words went through me slow. "No. Did you sign any venue insurance forms? Liability riders, alcohol service permissions, parking authorizations, or temporary use agreements?" "No." Another pause. Paper moving on his end. Martin had handled closings wills and one ugly drainage dispute for June and me over the years. He was not a man who hurried himself unless something deserved it. "I got a call this morning from a county clerk I know," he said. A filing crossed her desk connected to this property. It listed Claire as owner-authorizer for a private event with expanded service use on the grounds. That kicked up a title review because of the recorded restrictions attached to your deed. I leaned one shoulder against the barn boards. The wood was warm already. "What restrictions, Walt?" His voice changed, then softened some. "June's restrictions." I shut my eyes for 1 second. 3 years since she'd died, and there were still moments when hearing her name unexpectedly felt like somebody opening a door into weather. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," he said, not unkindly. "Maybe not fully, but you know the period I'm talking about. After Kevin's equipment note went bad, after there was that talk of leveraging acreage." I opened my eyes and looked out over the side yard. 2 boys in white shirts were carrying folded cocktail tables toward the tent, one of them holding his tie over his shoulder so it wouldn't swing. A woman in green heels was trying to cross the gravel and regretting every step. Kevin. I hadn't thought about that in a while. My son had been 30 then, and full of those big overheated ideas men get when they've never quite had to pay for the last one before beginning the next. There'd been some talk about a trucking partnership, then some equipment loan, then one evening June had sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and asked me in a voice too calm to ignore whether I had told Kevin he could use the place as reassurance with the bank. I hadn't. Kevin said later he only meant it loosely. June never liked loosely where land was concerned. "You're telling me she changed the deed. I'm telling you she had me prepare survivorship and control protections that vested full authority in you and blocked informal transfer assumptions. We recorded them." She was very clear. I looked down at my free hand. It was resting flat against the red paint, and for a second I could see June at that same kitchen table, reading every page with those half-moon readers low on her nose, pushing her hair behind one ear, asking Martin what happened if children began talking like something belonged to them before it actually did. At the time, I'd thought she was still mad about Kevin. Maybe she had been seeing farther than I was willing to look. "What exactly did Claire file?" I asked. "Event authorization naming herself as owner responsible party. There's more than one document. I'm trying to get copies in hand, but it's enough that I contacted the county. If this proceeds under false representation, you need immediate correction on the record." I said nothing. "Walt." "She knows better," I said. And even to me it sounded like a man saying grace over an empty plate. Martin let that sit a moment. Then he said, "Maybe she does. Maybe she told herself a story that made it feel close enough. I don't know. What I do know is that once people start using the wrong story on paper, it tends to spread." Spread, that was the right word for it. Like thistle, like rust, like one season of not watching a fence line and then pretending you didn't notice what had rooted there. "What happens now?" I asked. "I've requested county confirmation. Sheriff may need to make an appearance just to prevent a bigger mess later, especially if vendors or service use are running under bad authorization. I'd rather embarrass people this afternoon than untangle fraud language next week." The word embarrassed bothered me. Not because he was wrong, because it told me where everybody's mind would go first. I don't want a scene. I know you don't, he said. That may be how you got here. After he hung up, I stayed where I was a while, with the phone in my hand. Music drifted from the tent, just a few scales on steel guitar and keyboard, while the band checked levels. Somebody laughed too loud and then lowered it when no one joined. The smell of smoked brisket was stronger now. Behind me, the barn boards held heat from the sun the way June used to hold heat in bed long after I'd gotten up. I told myself there had to be some explanation. Claire had been stretched thin. Weddings did things to people. Brent liked language. Folks from town talked ownership all sorts of casual ways. Our place, the family property, what we're doing with the grounds. Maybe it had all blurred. Then Brent came around the corner with two men in sport coats and loafers that had never met manure. He didn't see me at first. If we level out past the lower fence line, he was saying you can easily run another 80, maybe 100 cars without disturbing the sight line from the tent. One of the men nodded toward the field. And you'd keep it private events only? At first, Brent said. Claire likes the idea of preserving the family feel. Destination weekends, maybe some corporate retreat stuff if it fits the brand. The brand. I stayed still. The second man asked, You own all the acreage behind the creek too? Brent gave a little shrug that made me understand all at once why some men wear jackets to lie in. Enough to matter. Then he saw me. Walt, he said. Easy as you please. There you are. These guys are friends of my dad's from Columbus. Just showing them the setup. The two men turned polite at once, both smiling the way strangers do when they realize the older man nearby might be more than background. I said, This isn't a setup, it's a farm. One of them chuckled, like that might be humor. Brent didn't. Right, he said. Of course. I just mean, for today. For today, I said, you're still standing on my hay ground. There was a tiny beat there. Not enough to start anything. Just enough for the men to shift their weight and become interested in the trees. Brent smiled again, but the edges had tightened. Sure. Absolutely. He moved them along, then talking about the pond view. I watched them go and felt something cold and clean move through me that hadn't been there an hour earlier. It wasn't rage exactly. Rage is hot and fast and mostly useless. This felt more like a board going level after years on uneven blocks. Later was never coming. The picture Claire promised me later was the same kind of later people use when they want a child quiet in church. Not now, maybe later. Let me get through this part first. Only the part they wanted to get through was me. Elaine found me by the washroom door where the extra ice was stacked in bags. You look peaked, she said. I'm fine. That word has ruined more families than whiskey. I almost smiled at that. Elaine handed me a sweating paper cup of lemonade. Her own hands were tight around another one. You heard from Martin, she asked. I looked at her. How would you know Martin called me? She glanced toward the house, then back. Because he called me first, looking for you. I missed it. He left a message. I took a swallow. The lemonade was warm already. June changed the papers. Elaine let out a breath through her nose, not surprise exactly. More like confirmation of weather she'd expected. She thought she might. You knew. I knew she was worried. Elaine's eyes moved past me toward the barn where voices kept rising for photographs. After Kevin's mess, she told me one night she was beginning to understand that children could love a place and still start counting it before they had any right. I looked away. The trouble with grief is that it leaves some doors closed longer than you realize. There were whole conversations June and I had started and then left sitting because there'd been calves to check or bills to pay, or a daughter to help through nursing school or a son to drag back from some foolishness. Then she got sick, and after that every talk felt like it had to be about things larger and smaller at the same time. Medications. Insurance. Whether the peonies needed splitting, we did not sit around discussing which child might someday decide politeness was as good as permission. What else did she say, I asked. Elaine looked at me a long time before answering. She said you were a good man with one bad habit. She tightened her hands around the cup. You always thought carrying people was the same thing as keeping them straight. That hurt because it was true and because it sounded exactly like June. From the barn side, the photographer called for one with just immediate family before cocktail hour, and there was a round of movement and voices. I could not see it from where I stood, but I didn't need to. I knew already where I would not be placed. I should have made her stop, Elaine said quietly. Claire. Years ago. The little things. The way she'd talk about this place once she got a little money around her. Like the old life was something to improve out of existence. I shook my head. She's getting married. People get carried away. Elaine looked at me with something close to pity then, and I hated that more than if she'd argued. No. Walt, she said. They get carried away into what was already in them. The band started up for real after that some bright country number with too much cheer in it for the hour. Guests drifted toward the tent with drinks in hand. Claire passed 20 feet from me on Brent's arm, laughing at something one of his cousins said. She didn't look toward the washroom. Brent did, just once, quick, measuring. Then Claire stopped near a cluster of people by the tent flap, a woman in a navy dress among them asking about the property. I could hear Claire because the wind shifted. We've always known it would eventually be ours to shape, she said. It was just a matter of timing, ours. Not sentimental, not careless, not stress. A matter of timing. I felt all at once the years line up different behind me. Kevin talking loose to Banks. Claire teasing June about all this old farmhouse clutter, the Thanksgiving she brought home college friends. Brent, 2 summers ago, asking what the back parcel would appraise at if somebody ever wanted to monetize the view. Me standing there every time letting the remark pass because a man can wear out his own dignity, making excuses for the people he loves. From the front drive came the slow crunch of tires on gravel. At first, nobody paid it any mind. Cars had been coming and going all day. Then the sound slowed, steadied, and stopped in a way that made people look. Through the gap between the tent and the maple, I saw the county cruiser ease past the white sign at the end of the drive and start up toward the barn. The music kept playing for another 10 seconds after the cruiser stopped, which somehow made the whole thing feel worse. Not louder. Worse. A steel guitar line drifted out over white tablecloths and mason jar centerpieces while people turned in their chairs and shaded their eyes toward the drive. Sheriff Neil Hensley stepped out. Slow took off his hat and closed the door behind him with the care of a man who knew every sound carried farther than it should in family situations. I had known Neil a long time. Not close, county close. Enough to nod at the diner, enough to know he'd buried one brother and divorced one wife and didn't enjoy being made part of other people's worst afternoons. He looked at me first. Mr. Lawson. Neil. By then, Claire had come away from the tent, Brent at her side, and half a dozen other people had drifted close under the excuse of concern. The photographer was still holding his camera. Elaine had stopped near the barrel table with both hands around her paper cup. Brent's father wore the expression of a man calculating how public something might become. Claire's smile came on a half-second too late. Is something wrong? Neil glanced once at the folder in his hand. I'm here on a civil matter regarding property representation and event authorization. He kept his voice respectful but not private. There was no private left in it. Mr. Lawson, are you the legal owner of record of this property? I heard the tent go quiet behind me in a way no band leader can fix. Yes, I said. Claire gave a quick, small laugh. Okay, I'm sorry. What is this? Dad did. Martin seriously do something today? On my wedding day. Neil opened the folder. The papers made that dry, official sound. Papers always make as if the county itself were clearing its throat. I have certified copies from the recorder's office, he said. The property remains under the sole legal control of Walter Lawson pursuant to recorded survivorship and restriction documents filed 3 years ago. There is no transfer on record to Claire Mercer, Brent Mercer, or any related entity. Brent spoke then faster than he should have. Nobody said there was a transfer. This is just family use. There must have been some clerical issue with a vendor. Neil turned his head and gave him the kind of look lawmen save for men in loafers who mistake speed for authority. The filing listed an owner-authorized use representation under Mrs. Mercer's name, he said. That is not clerical. Claire's face changed a little at that. Not collapse. Not yet. But the room left it somehow. The wedding smile had nowhere to stand. She looked at me. Dad. I was handling 100 things. It was wording. I looked at her a long moment before answering. All afternoon I had been stepping around her feelings the way a man steps around extension cords in a dark garage. Careful. Automatic. Without even thinking anymore. Somewhere in the last 10 minutes that had stopped. Wording is what you use when you know the truth and want it to sound like something else I said. Nobody moved. The barn was behind us, bright red in the lowering sun. Same boards June and I had painted in old jeans with a radio on the windowsill, and Claire, 10 years old, then running in and out with warm bottles of orange soda because she thought that was what painters drank. That memory came so sharp it almost unsteadied me. I had to plant both feet harder in the gravel. Claire shook her head. That is not fair. No, I said. What wasn't fair was standing me off that barn an hour ago like I was in the way of my own family. A few people looked down then. The photographer did. Elaine closed her eyes briefly and opened them again. Claire dropped her voice, trying to draw it smaller, draw it back into family size. We were taking the wedding side line first. I told you we'd get one later. That later wasn't coming. Color rose in her face. You don't know that. I almost answered fast. Then I didn't. At 71, if you've learned anything worth carrying, it's that a man can waste a good truth by hurrying it. So I said I know what I heard all day. Brent stepped in again. Walt, with respect, this is becoming a scene over a misunderstanding nobody intended. I turned toward him. Then you should have had no trouble understanding whose land you are making plans for. That landed. I could see it land. One of Brent's Columbus friends had drifted just far enough away to pretend he wasn't listening. The planner had frozen with a stack of dinner menus in her hands. The band had gone fully silent now, instruments hanging awkward in mid-evening light. Claire's eyes shone, but whether from shame or anger, I couldn't tell. This farm was always going to come to us, she said. And that was the first honest sentence she'd spoken. There it was. Not stress. Not wording, not a bridal blur. Belief. I felt something settle inside me then, not because it hurt less, because it hurt plain. Come to you, I said. You talk like people die in neat order and leave places behind like folded coats. She stared at me. Your mother and I built this place when the back field still flooded every April, I said. She balanced feed bills against furnace repairs at that kitchen table. I welded gates here in January with my gloves freezing to the metal. We lost calves here, buried dogs here, raised you here. This wasn't some backdrop waiting for the generation with better shoes. Brent opened his mouth, but Neil lifted one hand without looking at him, and Brent shut it again. Claire swallowed. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. My voice never rose. That was the strangest part, maybe. I had spent years thinking moral force would feel like anger when it came. It didn't. It felt like standing upright without apology. You meant exactly what you've been saying all day. That this place was already yours in every way that mattered, mine only on paper, old, temporary, sentimental. Her face tightened. That's not what I said. It's what you did. That was the line. I knew it when it left my mouth. All day long, everybody had been hiding in hide language. Timing, layout, visuals, wedding side, immediate family, clean sight line, future use. It was all words built to keep behavior from having to answer for itself. Once the behavior got named, the scaffolding came off. Elaine stepped forward, then voice soft but carrying. June knew this day might come. Claire turned toward her aunt as if struck. Aunt Elaine. Number. Elaine's hands were trembling around the empty cup now. Your mother sat with Martin and fixed those papers because she said Walt would keep carrying everybody till they forgot he was the ground under them. That one hurt me and steadied me at the same time. Claire's mouth parted. Mom said that she knew you, Elaine said, and she knew him. For a second I saw my daughter at 12 with skinned knees and a braid coming loose furious because the fair board had handed first ribbon to another girl's pie. June had said then, in the truck on the way home, Claire's going to need teaching that wanting something doesn't turn it into hers. We never taught it well enough. Neil cleared his throat gently. Mr. Lawson, I need to ask whether you intend to allow continued use of the property for the remainder of the event under your authority. Every eye near us turned back to me. That was the real moment. Not the folder, not the sheriff, not even Claire's face. Power had come back into my hands, and what mattered was what kind of man I would be while holding it. I looked at the tent, at the tables, at the old maple Claire had wanted kept clear in the background, at the barn doors June had painted with a roller while singing under her breath, at my daughter in her white dress breathing hard, now no longer polished enough to hide inside. Then I said, "The ceremony's done. Guests can eat. Music can finish. But there'll be no more talk today on paper or out loud that this farm belongs to anybody but me." Nobody answered. And one more thing I said. I turned to the photographer, the young man still clutching his camera at his chest. You took an immediate family picture without the father of the bride on the land where the bride was raised. I held his eyes till he stopped looking for a way out. We're correcting that now. Or you can explain to your clients later why the only honest photo of this day is the one you failed to take. He blinked once hard, then nodded. Yes, sir. Claire made a sound then, not quite a sob, not quite protest, more like the first noise a person makes when the story they were standing in disappears under them. I did not comfort her. That cost me more than anything else that day. We took the photograph by the barn 10 minutes later. Not a happy one. Not a magazine one. Brent was stiff. Claire's eyes were red. I stood beside her because I was her father, and because the place behind us was mine and June's before it was ever hers to inherit. The sun was lower now, kinder on everything. The photographer took 3 frames, and for the first time all afternoon nobody told me where to stand. People ate after that in the uncertain quiet families use when truth has sat down among them. The band played softer songs. Brent's father left early. Claire stayed mostly inside the house. Once passing through the kitchen for coffee, I saw her standing by June's old table with one hand flat against it, looking not angry now, but young in a way I had not seen in years. I kept walking. Some reckonings a person has to feel without witness. By full dark, the rented lights were strung gold across the tent, and the pasture beyond them had gone black and wide. Men folded chairs. Someone stacked serving trays in the washroom. The sign by the drive had been taken down. I never saw who removed it. I was by my truck when the photographer came over, jacket off now, tie loosened. "Mr. Lawson," he said, "I printed this one in the mobile unit." He handed me a single photograph. Not the formal correction shot. Another one. It was me standing alone beside the barn, just before sunset, one hand in my pocket, the red boards behind me, the field going soft at the edges. I must have been looking off toward the west pasture, toward the place June used to walk in the evening with a coffee mug after supper, checking light on the fences as if it mattered. "This one's the real one," he said quietly. After he left, I climbed up onto the tailgate and sat there with the picture in both hands. The night smelled like trampled grass, diesel, spilled beer, and a little bit of late clover from the far field. Somewhere out past the pond, frogs had started up. The barn lights were dimmed now. Folding chairs stood crooked in the dark, like they'd been left by people in a hurry to get clear of themselves. I looked at the photograph again. June had been right, which made me miss her, fierce and fresh all over. She had known paper might have to remember what family would rather not. She had known me too, known how long I could mistake endurance for peace, known I might need one hard thing placed between me and my own softness. I did not feel victorious sitting there. That would be too young a word for it. What I felt was cleaner than that and lonelier. The farm lay quiet around me, not grateful, not sentimental, just true, and for the first time in a long while I understood that being needed and being seen were two different mercies. I sat there until the last car eased down the gravel drive and the dark took back the yard, holding the one honest picture from the day on the tailgate between my hands.